Fantastic, absolutely fantastic, and wonderful to see West Africa, Southern Africa, and we had a question obviously from Madagascar. So it's great to see that, and we are very optimistic obviously about the future, but it's got to catch up. We've got to get that financing in place so that the infrastructure can cope with the demand. That's very important, and the passenger experience is obviously key as well. So just before we move on to our next panel, which I think a lot of you will be quite interested in for many different reasons, I just wanted to mention one more thing, which is if any of you did bring any old clothes, we put it in the email saying if you would like to donate any old clothes or running shoes, they are going to be donated to the Cape Town Central Improvement District, who've got 7 NGOs around the city centre that they support with donations. All those donations get to the people they're meant to get to, and often donations obviously don't always end up reaching the intended recipient. So we manage the process, or the organization in question does. If you do have any at lunchtime, if you could drop them in our office on this floor, at 3:15, they'll be coming to collect everything that we've collated. So if you do have that, that would be great if you can drop that off. So the fourth panel, so we've got still got some awesome stuff going on. There's tea and coffee outside, so feel free to just nip out. You can bring it back in. There's pastries and different bits and bobs. This is something that I was really keen to do, and we talked about this in the advisory board. All of these panel sessions, all of these topics have come because not I sat in a room and decided. I engaged with the community, airlines, airports, suppliers, the whole lot. And we sat down in January and we said, what are the topics? And then we walked away and tried to put this together. And it's all about the public perception of airlines in Africa, something that my moderator is very, very sort of accustomed to. And I was introduced to Chris Klick through the Cape Town team. And it's an absolute honor to have somebody who's held the position of the former Lufthansa Group spokesperson and former corporate VP at Star Alliance. So he's somebody who's been through a heck of a lot. He's seen it all. And he's very passionate about Africa. So please welcome Chris to the stage, and we'll get on with the show. Welcome, Chris.
Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction. It's more important that we welcome our panelists, and I'd like to have Chris Zweigenthal come to the stage. Many of you know him as the representative for the airlines here in the southern tip of Africa. And so he is a well-known speaker to many panels. We have Professor Wolfgang Thome, who will be joining me on stage, the publisher of the largest blog for tourism, let me get it right, aviation and conservation in Eastern Africa. Aviation first. Okay, today aviation first. And we have our friends from Air Namibia, Xavier, Masule, the only airline on the stage, but I'm sure we have some more airlines here in the room which can probably participate in our conversation. But while they are going on stage, I need to test you. Public perception, that is something which we all are part of, and so I'd like to ask you 2 or 3 questions, and the answer is either yes or no.
Yeah, you take this.
Airlines in Africa know how to run sustainable and profitable business. Yes? Hands up. No. Yes, you know, particularly the airlines, except of your airline, you know how to do it, but the others, the question, again, let me test it out. Airlines know how to run a sustainable and profitable business. Airlines in Africa. Yes or no? Yes. Okay, no. And the others say so-so. Okay, we take this one. Later on, we discuss about that. Airlines in Africa offer value for money. Yes? Yes? No? Okay. So that we're not only talking about airlines. Governments in Africa understand the value of liberal air services regime. Yes? No? Okay, now we're talking. Thank you very much. And the last one, aviation in Africa is safe. Yes? Good one. No? Good. I think we have at least 4 subjects which we can talk about, and we have a short measure about public perception. And one of the reasons why the public is informed about our business is that we have newspapers and journalists, and some of you are in the room. Please help us to make this a lively panel by offering your own opinion and observations, not just questions. And we start with throwing those opinions into the panel from the very beginning so that we make it as active as possible. So headlines about airlines are quite frequent. You had one relatively early in the game. Can you tell us a bit about this recent headline which your airline had to face, Xavier?
Sure. Okay. I was hoping you are not going to ask that. Thanks, Chris. As you rightly said, airlines feature most of the times in the media. We see what is happening in South Africa, in Namibia, and elsewhere. It's true we were in the media, headlines on some topics which might not have been very pleasant, but unfortunately that is the reality that we find ourselves in. The one which might have been very topical, which the magnitude in terms of denting the perception is maybe the storyline along the issues of Air Namibia having approached the local banks, the decline to lend us the money, and bankruptcy was imminent, and all those things. Now, if you look at the media today, it's very efficient in terms of the reach out and how far the news travels. Because apart from hard-printed newspapers, there's also online versions, and that gets amplified by posting it on social media platforms, on online chat forums, and so the reach is quite extensive, and we can feel the impact thereof. In our case, it's true we had approached the local financiers, and it's true they said, no, we will not give you the money. And the media was right in reporting the way they reported it. It's just that the one part of it might not have been the situation in terms of the imminence of bankruptcy. What we were trying to do is to restructure our balance sheet. We wanted to restructure our debt portfolio so that we can get more favorable terms. But the media did not know that part, and we cannot really blame them for not having brought it in. Maybe we should blame ourselves a little bit for not having engaged them more.
So you're saying it's a proactive approach which will help you. Is that something which is not only true for such a case like in a bankruptcy article coming up in the media? Chris, is that true for other stories as well?
Absolutely. I think the whole question of perception and how you deal with the media, for me, is one of the most important things. We deal with the media representing the airline industry. We don't get into the individual issues of particular airlines, but the important thing is for us to get the message across. So my principle of dealing with media has always been to treat them with the greatest respect, to be absolutely open, accessible, available, to be able to talk through things, to give a consistent, clear message, and also to ensure that the right message does get across. I think from an airline perspective, it's absolutely critical that they establish a very similar open relationship with the media, and that also there is a very clear set of communication between the CEO and the media spokesman, that they know that this is the message they want to get across and that they are able to do so in such a way. It's also important to know what you can and cannot say. And obviously, I think when you talk about an example of similar to what Xavier has been speaking about, if there is a problem, admit there's a problem. Not necessarily if there's some things are confidential to put out into the open space, say, look, I will clarify and I'll come back to you within a certain period of time, so that we just try and get the message out there. But if you don't play it honest and clear with the media, they will crucify you.
And time is of an essence, you know. Absolutely. You say there must be a connection between the CEO. What happens when the CEO tells you, oh, no, I don't want to talk about it?
Yes, no, you can't do that.
I think we've had that before. So time is of an essence. Do you think that you're getting enough information out of African airlines?
Well, we heard some very interesting comments. And I think airlines need to understand that the media is a potential partner and not an enemy. And in order to stay engaged with the media, they need to give sufficient background information, at times even off-the-record information, so that media people understand what is going on, like in your case. But with many airlines in Africa owned by government, they are obviously bound into communication protocols, which very often makes it almost impossible to engage with media the way we in the media expect. And the less professional colleagues of mine then look at every opportunity for payback. And I think you suffered from that very recently, because then very quickly they talk of bankruptcy, just aim to do you in and punish you for their perception of what your airline should have done and how they should have engaged with it.
Yeah. I think the airline managers would not like to see headlines like we had it just recently here in the media, grounded over serious safety risks, broke airline goes on spending spree and things like that. So why is it that those negative stories are coming up first? There is this saying that bad news is good news and good news is no news, but is it also that the airlines are not really able to communicate their good sides good enough in the continent here? Chris?
Well, you know, I think what you say, it's more juicy to talk negative, and that's one of the big issues. And unfortunately, we don't have the greatest reputation for consistent performance of aviation in Africa. So the problem is that many times, and I've caught myself in that as well, you're tending to defend the situation instead of trying to put a positive solution forward. So the important aspect is to be able to try and counter negativity with positivity in terms of the way in which you're going to solve a problem. We've got huge success stories to talk about in Africa. And an example, as I was at a recent conference in San Francisco, and I was asked to talk within all the Silicon Valley gurus. And I was asked to talk about what's Africa doing. So I thought to myself, how do you deal with this? Do you talk about just the challenges we're having? Because obviously there are challenges. And then example I gave was what Nico talked about yesterday, about the ShopRite Checkers situation. The ability for us to get money into outlying communities to people who can't get a credit card because they don't have a credit rating. But you can actually, on your phone, SMS a message, an authorization. They go to ShopRite Checkers, they draw the cash. And all these gurus with banks and everything like that was saying, I didn't realize that was happening down there. So there's some very good news stories to be able to tell about Africa and the way in which we're actually developing in a lot of our infrastructure development that's taking place and passenger facilitation, passenger self-service. We're moving, and we're benchmarking ourselves well against the rest of the world.
Actually, the room, just in answering our question, gave us another good story, because when we asked, is aviation safe? Most of the hands are saying yes.
But then, those are the experts.
Yeah, but on the other
not
side...
the general public.
Exactly. When I come into conversations with people from other parts of the world, they always ask me, can I fly with a certain airline in the continent? And so it's obviously still a problem to bring this fantastic safety record, which the airlines have created over the last couple of years, into the media and into the public perception. Is that right?
Yes. Absolutely. I think the introduction by IATA of IOSA and the upping of the stakes with EIOSA has tremendously improved the safety record in Africa. Yes, we still have challenges. Yes, we are still below global average, but we are getting there. But the general public doesn't know that. And as you said, a lot of media organizations focused on the bad news, not on the good news. And then when something happens, the airlines fail to stay ahead of the spread of news, and as a result, get hammered again in the public opinion. Would you not think so?
That's exactly the situation. Because often you find yourselves, instead of dealing with normal challenges that are supposed to be coming your way as an industry, on top of that, you still have to deal with public perceptions. I look at our situation where we fly into Europe. We are EIOSA compliant, and we have a safety record which has not been questioned by anybody, but still by virtue of being from Africa, we are perceived to be not so safe.
Perceived.
We have a few journalists in the room, so may I ask them to actively consult now the airlines on how to better connect to the media and how to improve certain public perception issues, which we have all seen in this short question which I asked. Anybody volunteering? Otherwise, Lyndon, I would like to volunteer you to that question.
I think something that we need to take cognizance of, and I'm speaking as a former member of the Fourth Estate and someone who works extensively with journalists. We have this, what we all talk about as being the new media, online media. And just something to put to people in the media in the room here as well. Headlines are written, have always been written, whether it's for a newspaper that was going on a newsstand or whether it's for something that goes online. They're there to do one thing, and that is to attract eyeballs, to sell copy, okay, to shift newspapers or to draw viewers. And today, search engine optimization is probably the most powerful magnet for drawing eyeballs, for getting people, and why do websites want the eyeballs? It's not primarily about the content, it's about the advertising. The advertising revenues are what drive the media, and unfortunately, I think the airlines become the victims, if you like, of the way in which new media work. And I think you find not just the airlines, they're not unique. All industries face that, but there is a fascination that we have as human beings with aviation, and that's because it's still not accepted. Even though it's a routine thing a lot of us do, it's still not accepted as a natural thing to do. And so we can talk about business and profitability, and we can talk about environment, and we can talk about all the other things, but when it comes to safety, something resonates with us, fundamentally with us as human beings. And I think if, I look at some of the, for example, some of the Nigerian websites, it's not unusual to see a headline that says, 200 people narrowly escaped death when plane landed. Yeah. You go, right, okay.
And it was a normal land.
Yeah. And again, all of that is about shaping and drawing those eyeballs. So it's a challenge we've got to overcome. And I think the challenge to the airlines has got to be, have you got the resources to manage the online media as well?
Yeah. So online media, again, we're coming obviously back to this shift between the good old daily newspaper into a complete new world of communications. It's no longer just knowing the 3 or 4 journalists which report on aviation in each country. It is now the hundreds of thousands of social media contacts which the airlines have, and every single one of them can become a media disaster from one second to another. So do you think the airlines in Africa are already prepared to this new way of communicating, Xavier?
It comes with, it's a new channel. Unfortunately, it's developing very fast, and we have to catch up, overtake, and stay abreast. I can relate one story where our flight out of Johannesburg was 5 minutes late. One of the passengers came and took a screenshot, a photo of the boarding gate departure time, and saying, I'm still on the ground. And he attracted more than 150 comments within a space of 15 minutes. So it's very difficult. It's a challenge that we need to embrace and find ways of how do we manage this.
Yeah. Chris, are airlines defining good communications as part of business success?
I think they certainly do, and they intend to do so. Whether they get it right all the time is, of course, another question. But I think that, just to pick on this topic as well, is that the mode of communication has changed. In fact, we're all newsmakers, because We don't, by virtue of the fact that we can go on Facebook or whatever, we actually get the message out there. And if we get a media communication that maybe have been placed in an article in the wrong context, and we always hear about, I was quoted out of context, I was quoted out of context. And sometimes it's because a statement was put out and somebody was looking for a specific angle within a particular story, and that was how it was quoted. So, I mean, in many of the publications, I say with all due respect, because I know time is an essence in terms of getting stories out, but if a media statement is put out by an organization, that same statement is quoted verbatim in a number of and there's no context for the particular story that person was trying to look at. So we, I think, have a responsibility whether we can, and we know that anybody can create a news story, including the President of the United States, which he constantly does. So it's quite interesting that there's a responsibility for everybody in that regard.
Observing all the stories which come onto your desk every day, and there are ones which you immediately put through into your outlets, but there's others where you say probably they don't work for the public, or they don't work from your perspective. So is the quality of the communications from the airlines to the journalists already at par with other parts of the world?
Well, to a great extent, yes. Mm-hmm. Many airlines excel in corporate miscommunications. I think that needs to change. They need to learn to communicate with the media, and they need to keep talking with key media people. And even if they have to go off record, and professional journalists respect that, because otherwise they will not be given the time of day when they ask something next time. You see where I'm going with that. You need to keep talking and engaging with the media so that you turn them into partners and move them away from that, how the airlines perceive us as enemies. Crisis miscommunication is a hallmark when something happens. This needs to turn into proper crisis communications and management, staying ahead with your messages. And I do acknowledge in Africa it's difficult, because when an airline is owned by government, very often that very government puts seal on their lips and saying, we will be coming up with a statement. By the time that statement comes out, it's far too late, and the damage has been done by the less responsible media. I'm saying that specifically. You asked how much comes across my desk. A lot. And of course, I do tend to give some preference in my publications to airlines which prove to be proactive and honest. We don't like to be misled over issues. FastJet is here. Must acknowledge that they have become very proactive. Rwanda, I don't know whether they're still in the room. They're doing the same. Some other airlines have a very frigid relationship with journalists, colleagues of mine, and even myself. And I start wondering, why should that be so? That needs to be changed. And I would hope that you, through your association, through your members, and you, when you talk to colleagues in CA fora, that you get that message across to treat the media in a way that, through a partnership, better reporting can be achieved in the future.
So you mentioned the governments not being able to react, or giving the airlines the opportunity to react quickly. Obviously, from the question which we asked in the beginning, the governments are also in another case not actually up to speed when it comes to liberal air services. We got a complete no in the room here. Which role do they play in the setup of the aviation perception? Must they even learn more than the airlines and the airports? Chris?
I think that governments obviously play a huge role in determining policy, and obviously putting plans together to ensure that, and creating an enabling environment for airlines in which to operate. Obviously, the ideal situation for me would be if it's a state-owned airline, for example, or even enabling with the private airlines that are operating as well, is that once they've set up a structure such as a good board and a good management structure, that structure must be allowed to perform the function and be held accountable according to a business plan that they've actually put, and they've probably got approved by their shareholder. And it's imperative that they're allowed to continue. I think that would give the confidence to the management to be able to engage with media in a lot clearer, in a much clearer fashion, and be able to get the message across. Where you've got constantly backwards and forwards between government and management trying to put the correct narrative of what's going on in a particular airline in the media, I think that's where the problems start to occur and where the miscommunication happens. So allow the executives that have been appointed to do the job.
So some governments try to tell the world that they have to protect their airlines, but are they protecting them from commercial success?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the present great oncoming problems to the media industry is the reaction by governments trying to deal with content they disagree with, possibly not on fact, but on perception. And several countries in Africa have now started to criminalize content which is not licensed, or call it rumor mongering. Tanzania, I think, is a case in point where bloggers now need to register and pay huge license fees. This is all aimed at suffocating critique and shutting down unwanted content. In Uganda, we have just got a social media tax because the president thinks people who are on social media are idlers and wasting everyone's time. For myself, in order to escape all of that, I've relocated the legal location of my publication into Germany, where no such issues arise, in order to be able, well, yes, but it goes to show that the new media, the every person's media abilities through blogs, through social media platforms, has received the wrath of government and has been targeted now of late by several governments on the continent in order to contain them, hamstring them, and shut them down wherever possible, including with criminal charges. I think it's a wrong way to go, and governments are doing themselves no service, because if it cannot be reported locally, people will be using other platforms which repeat what's going on somewhere, and the damage when it goes international and goes viral is much more and much greater than if they would properly engage and do what is expected of them.
So a hands-off government is what the airlines should convince their home governments to be when it comes to not only communications, but running the business as a whole. Do you have a hands-off government in Namibia?
Okay, Air Namibia is registered as a PTY Limited with a board of directors which is autonomous, and the company is designed to operate as a private company in the commercial space. That is the desire and how the policies and the structures are. However, by virtue of being required to perform some public service obligations, and also by virtue of receiving some financial assistance in those subsidized public service elements, that empowers the government to still stick their finger on what is happening. The extent of involvement is, however, very limited to those areas of interest which they are trying to protect.
Yep. So back to the perception. How do we turn this around? What else? We started to talk about it. What can we do to increase the level of positive perception of the aviation industry here? Chris?
I think a lot of the aspects that we talked about before where we got it wrong, clearly then we got it wrong. We need to change that way of engaging with the media. And I think there's probably good opportunities, and I know that in Namibia does, Xavier can talk about it, is to get all the stakeholders into a room and talk about your airline, talk about what you're doing, what your plans are for the future, where things may not have been 100% in the past, and talk to them and ask for input from stakeholders, whether they be passengers, and get passengers, get your client groups, your other service providers, those that you work with all the time, and start sharing the good news stories and where you're going to in the future. And then obviously the commitment to communicate and to engage on a more transparent, honest fashion into the future. It's creating perceptions and improving relationships.
Any thoughts, Wolfgang?
I would like to hear from my airline colleagues here, because this is really what matters.
Yeah, if you look at our risk matrix, also our scorecard, in the past we didn't have this issue of public perception management, but now it's featuring very prominently, and we have a number of initiatives lined up, including the point which Chris made reference to, where we have an annual key stakeholder convention, where we invite journalists, passengers, critics, everybody, governments. We put them in one room. We present our report on our activities, our challenges, our failures, our achievements over the last 12 months. And we open the floor and ask anybody to ask any question or make any remark. And we have seen a lot of change in attitude, especially from the media houses. Because if you tell them that this is what we did and this is where we failed, you are giving it to them. Then they lose interest. Then it's not news anymore. Because they have an important role to report those things which are not known. But if you put it in the public domain, it will be counterproductive for them to still go report on it.
But then it comes this element of consistency, so that it's not just a one-timer, but it is a consistent flow of information in both directions, so you can learn from the ideas of the public and the other way around.
Precisely, but that requires that the airlines employ professional communicators, that they don't look at the people who run social media handles on Twitter and on Facebook and on other professional media platforms like LinkedIn, that this is perceived within the airline as a dead end for a career. You need to employ people who have the competence, who can think on the fly, and who are able to effectively communicate what their CEO is not able to tell them at that very moment. Because that is really the issue. You can't get the CEO. What does that individual tell you when you have a question and it's a burning hot issue? So engage professionals to run these areas for you and stay in touch. You as a CEO, stay in touch on a regular basis like you do with your finance chief and with your the head of operations. Make sure that your head of corporate communications too gets your time and gets briefed so that he or she can effectively represent the airline and your own opinions.
Just to check with the room, any opinions or questions to the panel? Here's one.
Hi there, my name's Celine Brophy. I am the editor for Traveller24. It's an online platform, the lifestyle site of News24. I just add momentum when it comes to dissemination of information, use of social media in that regard. A key example from reporting or just sharing key outcomes from an event like this, being able to access your handles, having your communications department then actually, and when I say handles, I mean social media handles. Twitter is one of the most prolific in that regard, especially in crisis situations. It's one of our first points of calls. We're looking for authoritative figures. I second what Wolfgang is saying there. You want somebody who has a handle on a situation that in turn knows what the problem is and a trusted, reliable source. So owning that domain for yourself as an airline and being able to put out that information really empowers us as journalists to tell the proper story. I struggled to find a few, especially on the site, checking the different channels. So having that up and running with a powerful event such as this is just, the value of that is tantamount. Then being able to converse to that, saying it's not only crisis management in social media. You've seen how certain viral stories, happen, and social media is driving that to a large extent. I mean, SAA, with all of its negativity, was able to put out a post about one of its cabin crew taking a baby, putting it on its back, helping, a passenger. We pick up on that. Our audience loves those sorts of things. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we're blind to the issues, but within travel, it's an experience situation. Passengers, travelers are looking about experience. They're looking to be enriched and informed in a visually rich way and in the way that they communicate. So I think it's essential to look at those domains and ensure you're doing the proper checks and balances in that regard. It's powerful.
This is excellent advice for not only the airlines in the room, but also the airports in the room, which have similar situations as well. And just from a point of this American airline you're talking about has a social media department of 50 people.
For sure.
Yeah.
Numbers are key, but, counter to that, when you're bringing in the airports, AXA has been prolific in putting out this quarterly barometer. It's visually rich. It's infographics that we can disseminate. It gets shared widely across social media. So for me, for that, it's a good resource, but it's also, as many of you, I think, Chris, you said, they're putting thought behind it. What is the audience looking to get? Not just the business stakeholder, but across the board. So very useful in that regard.
It comes back to what you said. We have to adapt to the changing needs of not only the journalists, but the rest of the public, which in the end creates that perception. And by the way, it must not necessarily be the old, very seasoned communication geek which you hire for you. Sometimes the younger people know much better how to produce that content which you mean with the graphics and how to speak the new language of social media. So it must be a mix of skills which you employ in your communications department.
Yes, and that should be a position which is highly valued within the organization and not, as I said earlier on, seen as a deadbeat end to a career where someone is shoved into. When you do recruit afresh, make sure they meet these criteria and they tick all the right boxes.
So now this watch tells me that we should stay on time, but not without having Sylvain give a comment or a question.
We were talking earlier about the elephant in the room, and I think the elephant in the room here is, if you think about the total amount of public money that's been squandered by government in airline projects in the past, 30 or 40 years in Africa, either through corruption or through mismanagement, you understand why there's a public perception that those airlines are basically draining the public fiscus from money that could be very well spent elsewhere, that's being completely misallocated. So I think where we need the journalists is to expose those cases of outrageous incompetence or corruption, so that those governments are brought to account, and with more exposure, hopefully, those cases will stop being so frequent in this part of the world, and therefore the public perception of airlines will gradually increase.
Thanks for that comment. Here's another one. And then, John, I promise you to cut it off.
I just wanted to pick up on what Sylvain is saying, because it raises an interesting point. I think most of the airlines in the room are here for one reason, or in business for one reason, that's to make money, to sell seats, sell tickets, sell cargo space. And I'm wondering, is there a disjoint between, we talk about perception around things like corporate governance, around profitability, squandered money, etc. Is that necessarily translating into a drop in sales, in revenues, or are we talking about a different set of perceptions? A set of perceptions that says, I'm really only concerned with price, convenience, value for money. And so are we seeing two parallel universes, in a way, of perceptions that we have to manage? And again, I think, you know, perhaps Chris or Wolfgang as well, maybe you can offer some comments on this. In terms of addressing customers, and not necessarily shareholders and other stakeholders, but customers, are airlines doing enough to influence those micro-perceptions as well at a customer level? Because not everyone today is determining their travel choice based on a newspaper article in a business newspaper about corporate governance or profitability of an airline.
I think it's an interesting point, and Sylvain and Lyndon have made it. For me, there is a difference, and the problem at the moment is I always come back to thinking some of those issues were created not necessarily by the airline themselves in terms of what happened, and that's where I talk about maybe certain circumstances occurred that left them in that situation of requiring bailouts or subsidies or whatever the case may be. What I also think about is the people that run that airline, and I'm talking about the operational people. There's a huge responsibility for them, and they are passionate about their airline, and they're passionate about their customers. And if decisions are made at the top, and that's where I talk about accountability, business plan, allow the people to do their job, and that's why it's important to separate the two. Unfortunately, you do have a situation in many parts of Africa, no names, where there are problems at the top level, and you've got to enable those that are in control, in executive responsibility, to actually deal with those issues and hopefully get out of the problems. But think about the people that are working for that airline who do a heck of a good job, and also who have a passion for the airline as well as their passengers.
Okay, with a look to the watch, thank you very much to our panelists, and look forward to many positive headlines and tweets in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Prof. Thanks, Xavier. So I think the comment that stuck with me that I just picked up on was, we have to realize that the media aren't always our enemy. And when we decided to put this panel together, I'm not naming names, but it was very difficult to get an airline. I think they thought we were going to trap them on stage and ask them horrendously difficult questions. So I'm experiencing that as well, and I suppose I'm media too, with the way that I work. So I think that's quite an important point to make, and I just want to say a massive thank you to Xavier especially for actually fronting up. You know, you've heard it from the horse's mouth, and I've been in touch with Paul back in Namibia. I've sent him all the images already, and he wanted to be here today, and we also have another representative from Air Namibia from the comms department. And I know we have communications professionals like Nunarai from Zimbabwe with us as well. So, you know, hopefully I felt like that really delivered what we hoped it would, which was fantastic. So what I'm thinking is, we're a little tiny bit behind time, not massively. I'm thinking 10-minute coffee break. You can bring it all back in. It's all set up outside. And then we've got 2 more sessions. One is we have a presentation followed by a panel session talking about new technologies, how they're going to improve the profitability of airlines and airports across Africa. And really looking forward to that. If you've got any photographs or you're posting anything, don't forget to use the hashtag AviaDev. You'll still see the screens are ticking through. We just put a picture up of the run this morning, so you can see just how truly horrendous the conditions were. So keep your eyes on the screens. And then we finish today with something that's going to be the fireworks at the end, which is a one-on-one interview. So I'd like to recognize that Rafael Cucci, VP for IATA, has arrived. Unfortunately, he came in this morning, which is fantastic. And we're really looking forward to that session with Atto Germer as well. So go and grab a coffee, 10 minutes. We'll restart at 10 to 12. Thanks for your attention.